Everybody, welcome back to Topic 4 of Unit 3, Authoritarian Regimes in Defining a Nation. In the syllabus, this is listed as extremist regimes in defining a nation, and indeed the last two times I've recorded this, in 2010 and 2015, I've used extremist regimes. And it is true that the regimes we're looking at in this case are on the extremes of the right and the left of the political spectrum. However, authoritarian regimes beyond these groupings often turn to sport for similar ends. The idea is that you need to convince both your own people of the efficacy of your ideas and give them something to cheer for. Perhaps it goes back to that old Roman saying you can give them bread or you can provide a circus to keep the masses happy, and the sporting realm can be seen as somehow as the modern version of the circus. But there's also a case of trying to show that your ideas are working, because at least for the states we're looking at today, there's an element of trying to export your ideas, that part of the success of your ideology hinges on it being replicated by other people in other areas. So how do you convince them that your ideas really do have merit? What are the realms where this is possible? And one of those is sport. So this is like sports based and some other things. This is going to have two meanings, right? It's both an internal messaging and an external messaging. I know we've looked already at countries that try to show there's something collective about themselves through Jersey's national identity. You certainly don't have to be an extremist regime to do that. You can be any sort of nascent country who has a need to create a common identity. We've also looked at democracies like Australia that want to use sporting success, the medal tables, and hosting events as something special. But in this case, it's a little bit different because of the way they act and interact with others. These are new political, economic, and or social systems. Therefore, they feel real pressure to prove that there's some success. So that's where we're going to do. Tangible success is the key. And so for some, they'll turn to martial activities, actually go and conquer other places and have some interest in doing so. But for others, it's that exporting of ideas and the sporting success that guarantees it. So let's start with the one in the 20th century that kind of gets the ball rolling, and that is fascist Italy. The fascists were in charge in Italy from 1922, when Benito Mussolini, pictured here on the right, comes to power, through 1943, when an Allied invasion topples the regime, and Italy then enters the war on the side of the Allies. It's one of those peculiarities of 20th century history that Italy's both part of the Axis and the Allies. They had the good fortune, I don't know if you call it that, but the good fortune of losing early in the war in 1943 and then joining the fight against the Nazis. They were really interested in sport and in physical fitness. In fact, the fascist regimes instituted requirements for all factory workers to take breaks to come out and do calisthenics. They had a pillar of being of their ideology being physically fit, and showing that their population was ready, willing, and able if you needed to have to go to war, that they were fit. They were interested in harmony and discipline and order and courage, and sports provides an avenue to showcase those things. But what you need is a venue to show it forth. So you should know that as they try to do this formula, it starts about 6 years into the regime, 1928, that they started an official sporting publication from the fascists to talk about what they were doing. It's called Fascist Sport, and that they promoted it. But they needed events and places to prove what they were doing worked. So one of these is the Olympic, and another is the World Cup. So 1932, the Olympics were held in Los Angeles. Los Angeles in 2028 is going to become the first city to host the Olympics 3 times. They hosted in 1932, hosted in 1984, and they'll host again in 2028. So for Italy, this is a big undertaking because the Olympics, being in Los Angeles requires very long periods of ocean travel on liners to get there. But they commit to it in a big way to showcase what they've got, and we'll save how they do here for a little later in the conversation. They also happen to be hosting the 34 World Cup, and so this was in Italy, and euphemistically they say that Mussolini told people organizing the tournament that Italy must win. And they said, yeah. And he said, no, you don't understand. Italy must win. So there's allegations of rigging and of cheating and of formulating things to make sure that Italy won, to make sure Benito Mussolini was happy. But it gives them this tangible demonstration of success when they win the World Cup. So fascist Italy starts it, but if you look at a regime who kind of perfects the idea of sport being connected with their ideology, it's the Nazis and the hosting of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Now, you can plan for a lot of things. What you can't plan for is when someone who stands directly in contrast to your ideology being the one who's the most successful athlete of the games. And so this photo in the bottom right here is of U.S. athlete Jesse Owens. This is in the 200-meter dash. He wins 4 gold medals. He's the most decorated athlete of the games. And so if you're trying to prove the superiority of the Aryan race, and you get beaten by a black man from the United States, then it does hurt. But as you'll see in the medal table, they can claim victory. They just can't claim that they have the most decorated athlete. What they're interested in doing is more grand than just sports, and to show the success of their humans as athletes, or their ideology. So they have the advantage of hosting. And they institute a whole range of things that we come to associate with the Olympic Games that are actually invented and put in place by the Nazis. For example, the torch relay is an invention of the German hosts of the 1936 Olympics. And what they were doing with that is trying to show them not just as sort of passing the torch of who's hosting the games. They were interested in showing the torch of the pinnacle of civilization passing from the ancient Greeks to the Nazis of 1936. Right? That's a physical manifestation, they believe, of a spiritual ideal. And so they commissioned a really interesting documentary of the games made by filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl. You're asked to watch a bit of this for this course. They're going to take the ancient construction of the Greeks, like the Colosseum, and then pan or meld the shot into a picture of the great German stadia. They're going to take the statuary, the ancient Greek statuary, and blend that into a contemporary German. So they're going for a lot of the metaphors and ideas to show who they are and what they're like. I also am interested in the way the Parade of Nations works. So there's some film in that in the clip I've assigned for this unit. Each country, as they march in, they have to figure out: do you dip your flag to Hitler and the Nazis? Do you salute? How do you recognize them? Do you just turn and look? Because there's all sorts of political messaging going on there, which will come back when we talk about Beijing 2008 later. How do your athletes act and react? And so all these things are opportunities. So Nazi Germany sort of, overall, they'll believe this a great success, even though Jesse Owens has an alternate narrative there. You know, this regime of the Soviets, so where the fascists and the Italian and the Nazis come from the right of the political spectrum, the idea of being authoritarian and extreme is pretty equal on the right and the left. So the Soviet Union is an example of one of these regimes that comes from the left. And the regimes in power, the USSR exists from 1922 to 1991. But I have the second set of dates here, 52 to 88, because that's when they were active at the Olympics. They weren't really interested in going to the Olympics if they couldn't perform very well at the Olympics. So there's a time, particularly at the end of World War II, when they decide this is going to be part of their representation. I mean, when I talk about exporting your model, the USSR had something called the Comintern, which abbreviated since for the Communist International, and its job was to help transition states around the world to functioning more like the Soviet Union. And one of the things you could do to show that it was worth pursuing was have sporting success. So they really get into it in a big way, starting with Helsinki in 1952. And so of those Olympiads there between 52 and 88, they miss one, 1984, a boycott of the U.S. Olympics. We'll talk about that later. All time, if you look at the all-time medal tables, the USSR is still second for most medals, even though they haven't competed since 1988. They had phenomenal success in the Olympics in a wide range of sports and in ways in which let us be what you'll hear in a bit in a Cold War conversation. safely appreciative. You could be interested in their athletes. So Sports Illustrated, which was the premier weekly magazine for sports in the United States, not an arm of the government like Fascist Sport, but certainly one that spoke to popular opinions. Soviet athletes appeared several times on the cover. Olga Korbut, who's here in the large photo, she's a gymnast, really mesmerized a lot of the world in 1972 and 76. She's a cover athlete. Vasily Alexeyev here, who's as a young man, his image was burned into my brain from both Wide World of Sports and Olympic Games, because that red singlet is really a remarkable piece of clothing, and he's a very large man. But he won 80 straight weightlifting competitions. He won 2 gold medals. He was well-read and interesting guy. And so when you read him, then you read the articles in a place like Sports Illustrated, he's talking about the psychology of the Soviets and why they're more able to lift heavy weights than other people. It gives this chance to say, we have the strongest athlete of the world, and it matters. So this is their manifestation, and it plays out wonderfully for them. They have academies and work hard and show forth their grandeur. Related to them on the left is Cuba. So Cuba does some interesting things with sport. First, in 1959, when the revolution starts, as you may remember from last lecture, they integrate sports, they provide opportunities in sports, but they also use it to define the success of the country. So Fidel Castro, pictured here with Teofilo Stevenson. Teofilo Stevenson is, people think, may have been the best heavyweight boxer of his era, but he never fought Muhammad Ali. And he never fought Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali was a professional and Stevenson was an amateur. So one of the things that is interesting in the Cold War is this dichotomy between what amateur means in the two states, two kinds of regimes. We'll talk about that later. In Cuba, they got rid of professional athletics and had state athletes. In other words, when you became an athlete, you actually literally became an arm of the state. You represented the state. So, fortunately, they're not extremists in the way the Hussein brothers were in Iraq, where they're torturing their athletes, but they're going to venerate them, they're going to invest in them, it's going to be important. So, Javier Sotomayor, Ana Fidelia Quito, these are defining athletes of the Cuban era. How do they do? We'll see briefly. China is similar. What they're really interested in is hosting, and hosting for legitimacy. We'll get into this concept here in this unit, what it means to host and why regimes want to do it. What they're able to showcase is their efficiency and their ability to combine, in 2008, the ideas that they sort of come from the communist past, but have either a capitalist or a semi-capitalist present, where they have sort of these both worlds, and that they can be both successful in sports and successful in hosting is supposed to show it. This image, if you can't tell what it is on the left, it's drummers from the opening ceremonies. It sort of is this iconic image where these hundreds of drummers are synchronized and performing in a way that sort of says, look what they're capable of collectively if they put their minds to it. Really interesting stuff. We'll do a little bit more with that here later in the unit. Well, how they do. So if they're going to come to Olympic Games, they're going to come places to show what they're capable of, how they do. So Italy had a long way to go and had no track record of success. Second is remarkable and amazing. They definitely show that they're coming on strong. Germany, USSR, Cuba. I apologize for this. This is supposed to be pasted right up there, and I'll fix it later, but that's for 1976. I use 76 because Korbut and Alexeyev were both active there, and I was 9 years old and watching the game, so I remember it well. And then the Beijing Olympics with China winning. What's your takeaway? So I do want to say that in this case, in these examples, they've got the political, economic, and social ideas they're trying to communicate. But authoritarians often turn to sport. And you can read odd sort of remembrances of people about the heyday of sports in their country, particularly if they didn't really have a legacy before or after. I'll give you an example. Uganda was ruled by a fellow named Idi Amin, a very venal military dictator in the early and mid-1970s. And he was terrible to almost everyone in Uganda. But they won a bunch of medals at the Olympics. and they don't really win a lot of medals before or after. And so you can read things online where people are like, yeah, he was a terrible guy, but man, was it fun to win medals. Because these really can be things that we as individuals react to. You can say, they delivered us something. And even if it was a circus instead of bread, we sure enjoy the circus. And if that message resonates internally, then externally this kind of success can be valuable and important for the regimes as well.